"You are useless," the HOA president screamed at my disabled daughter, firing her on the spot. Emma had worked so hard to prove herself, but this cruel woman saw only her wheelchair. Little did Margaret know she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Our fight was just beginning. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My daughter Emma had always been different. Born with cerebral palsy, she faced challenges that would break most people's spirits. But Emma? She was a fighter. At 23 she had graduated college with honors, determined to prove that her disability wouldn't define her limitations. When the Pine Valley Homeowners Association posted a job opening for an administrative assistant, Emma's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She had been searching for work for 8 months, facing rejection after rejection. Most employers would smile politely during interviews, then send generic rejection emails that never mentioned the real reason. "Mom, this could be it," Emma said, her voice trembling with hope as she read the job description on her laptop. Her fingers, which sometimes struggled with fine motor control, carefully typed out her application. "They need someone organized, detail-oriented, and good with people." That's me. I watched my brave daughter pour her heart into that application. She spent 3 days perfecting her cover letter, highlighting her academic achievements and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. Emma had always been meticulous, perhaps because she had to work twice as hard to prove herself in a world that often saw her wheelchair before seeing her. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Emma's face glowed as she hung up the phone. "They want to interview me, Mom. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. That night, Emma laid out her best professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and matching skirt she had bought with her savings from her part-time tutoring job. She practiced answers to common interview questions, her speech sometimes slurred when she got nervous, but her determination crystal clear. The Pine Valley HOA office was a modest building nestled between perfectly manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. As I drove Emma to her interview, she squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens, I'm proud I made it this far," she whispered. The interview seemed to go well. Emma met with Mrs. Rodriguez, the current office manager, who appeared genuinely impressed by Emma's qualifications. They discussed the job responsibilities, answering phones, filing documents, scheduling maintenance requests, and helping residents with various inquiries. "When can you start?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked at the end of the interview. Emma's smile could have powered the entire neighborhood. Emma's first few weeks at the HOA office were everything she had dreamed of. Mrs. Rodriguez was patient and kind, showing Emma the filing system and explaining the quirks of different residents. Emma threw herself into the work with infectious enthusiasm. She arrived early every morning, her wheelchair gliding smoothly through the accessible entrance the HOA had installed years earlier for another employee. Emma organized files with color-coded systems, created spreadsheets to track maintenance requests, and greeted every resident with genuine warmth. "Your daughter is wonderful," Mrs. Rodriguez told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "She's brought such positive energy to our office. The residents love her." And they did. Mr. Chin, an elderly gentleman who lived on Oak Street, would stop by just to chat with Emma about his garden. Mrs. Patterson, a young mother of twins, appreciated Emma's patience when she called frantically about playground equipment that needed repair. Emma had found her place in the world, and it showed. She started wearing brighter colors, laughing more, and talking excitedly about work projects during our family dinners. For the first time since graduation, my daughter felt valued and productive. But perfect moments in life are often fragile, and ours was about to shatter. Margaret Whitfield became the new HOA president on a cold October morning. I should have known trouble was brewing when Emma came home that first day looking confused and upset. "There's something different about the new president, Mom," Emma said as I helped her transfer from her wheelchair to the couch. She looked at me like I was a problem to solve. Margaret Whitfield was everything Hollywood would cast as a stereotypical HOA Karen. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant whenever she looked at people she deemed beneath her social status. Within her first week, Margaret had implemented new efficiency standards and began scrutinizing every aspect of the office operations. She installed security cameras, demanded detailed time logs from all employees, and started what she called performance evaluations. She timed how long it took me to file documents, Emma told me one evening, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She stood behind me with a stopwatch. "Mom?" Mrs. Rodriguez tried to explain that I'm thorough, but Margaret just wrote notes on her clipboard. The hostile environment was taking its toll on Emma. She began having nightmares and would wake up early, practicing her filing speed in front of the mirror. My confident, radiant daughter was shrinking before my eyes. "Maybe I'm not fast enough," Emma whispered one night. "Maybe she's right to be concerned." "Emma, honey, you're excellent at your job," I assured her. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." But Margaret Whitfield was just getting started. The morning Emma came home crying uncontrollably, I knew something terrible had happened. She wheeled herself into the living room, her usually neat appearance disheveled, her eyes red and swollen. She said I was taking too long in the bathroom," Emma sobbed. "She timed me, Mom. She actually stood outside the door and timed how long I needed." My blood began to boil. Emma's cerebral palsy affected her mobility, and certain daily tasks naturally took her longer to complete. This wasn't laziness or inefficiency, it was a medical reality that any reasonable person would understand and accommodate. "What exactly did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while rage built inside me. "She said that 3 minutes was too long for a bathroom break. She said I was milking my disability for special treatment." Emma's voice broke on the last words. "She used air quotes when she said disability, Mom. Like it isn't real." I held my daughter as she cried, feeling helpless and furious. This was exactly the kind of discrimination we had hoped to avoid. Margaret Whitfield was systematically targeting Emma, using her disability as ammunition for harassment. The next week brought new humiliations. Margaret began announcing Emma's bathroom breaks over the office intercom, supposedly for transparency and time management. She moved Emma's desk to the back corner of the office, claiming the front area needed to be more presentable for visitors. "She told me to dress more professionally," Emma said one evening, showing me a formal reprimand Margaret had written. "I wear the same style clothes as everyone else, Mom. The only difference is that I'm sitting down." Mrs. Rodriguez tried to intervene, but Margaret had consolidated power quickly. She had replaced half the HOA board with her friends and allies, people who nodded along with her efficiency improvements without questioning the human cost. The incident that would change everything happened on a rainy Thursday morning in November. Emma had been struggling with a particularly difficult resident complaint. Mrs. Henderson from Maple Drive was upset about her neighbor's holiday decorations and demanded immediate action. Emma spent over an hour on the phone, patiently listening to Mrs. Henderson's concerns, researching HOA regulations, and crafting a diplomatic response that addressed the issue while maintaining neighborly relations. It was exactly the kind of thorough, thoughtful work that had made Emma so valuable to the office. But when Margaret walked by Emma's desk and saw her still working on the same file, she exploded. "This is ridiculous," Margaret shouted, loud enough for the entire office to hear. "A simple complaint shouldn't take all morning." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitfield," Emma replied, her voice shaking. Mrs. Henderson had several concerns, and I wanted to make sure I addressed everything properly. "You're useless," Margaret screamed, slamming her hand on Emma's desk. "Absolutely useless. I've been watching you, and you're nothing but dead weight in this office." The words hung in the air like poison. Emma's face went pale, and I could see her hands trembling as she tried to respond. I do my best," Emma whispered. "Your best isn't good enough," Margaret continued, her voice dripping with cruelty. "Maybe if you spent less time making excuses and more time actually working, you might be worth the salary we waste on you." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up from her desk, her face flushed with anger. "Margaret, that's completely out of line. Don't tell me how to manage my office." Margaret snapped back. "I'm tired of pretending this girl can do a real job. She's a charity case and everyone knows it." Emma's quiet sob cut through the office tension like a knife. She gathered her belongings with shaking hands, not meeting anyone's eyes as she prepared to leave for the day. That evening, Emma barely spoke during dinner. She pushed her food around her plate, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a hollow, defeated expression that broke my heart. "I think she's right, Mom," Emma finally said in a voice so small it was barely audible. "Maybe I am useless." The call came at 7:30 a.m. on a Friday morning, 2 weeks after Margaret's public humiliation of Emma. I answered the phone while Emma was getting ready for work, expecting it to be one of our regular morning callers. "This is Margaret Whitfield from Pine Valley HOA, the voice on the other end said curtly. "I'm calling to inform you that Emma's employment is being terminated, effective immediately." "What?" I asked, certain I had misheard. "Emma's performance has been consistently below standard. We're letting her go. She doesn't need to come in today. Her final paycheck will be mailed." The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. Emma appeared in the doorway, dressed professionally and ready for work, her face glowing with the small spark of confidence she had managed to rebuild over the past 2 weeks. "Who was that, Mom?" she asked cheerfully. I had to tell my daughter that her dream job, the work that had given her purpose and dignity, had been ripped away by a cruel woman who saw her disability as a burden rather than recognizing her abilities as an asset. Emma's face crumpled as I explained the phone call. She wheeled herself to her room and didn't come out for the rest of the day. I could hear her crying through the closed door, and each sob felt like a dagger in my heart. That evening Mrs. Rodriguez called me directly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I tried to fight it, but Margaret had already made up her mind. She's been building a case against Emma since day one, documenting every bathroom break, every phone call that took longer than average. "This is discrimination," I said flatly. "I know," Mrs. Rodriguez agreed. "And it's wrong. Emma was one of the best employees we've ever had. The residents loved her and she genuinely cared about helping people. Did she give any real reason for the termination?" Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. She said Emma was not a good fit for the professional image of the HOA office. But we both know what she really meant. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, staring at Emma's empty wheelchair in the hallway. My daughter, who had worked so hard to prove herself, who had brought joy and efficiency to that office, had been discarded like she was nothing. But Margaret Whitfield had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the strength of a mother's love and a community's sense of justice. I spent the weekend researching disability discrimination laws and contacting advocacy organizations. By Monday morning, I had appointments with 3 different attorneys and a detailed timeline of every incident Margaret had subjected Emma to. Emma remained in her room most of the weekend, alternating between tears and angry silence. On Sunday evening she finally emerged for dinner, her eyes red but her jaw set with determination. "I want to fight this, Mom," she said quietly. "Not just for me but for every person with a disability who's been treated like they're worthless." The first attorney we met with was sympathetic but cautious. "Disability discrimination cases can be challenging," he explained. "You'll need clear evidence of discriminatory intent." Fortunately we had it. Mrs. Rodriguez had kept detailed notes of Margaret's behavior, and several residents had witnessed the public humiliation. More importantly, Margaret's pattern of targeting Emma's disability-related needs created a clear paper trail of discrimination. As word spread through the Pine Valley community about Emma's termination, something beautiful began to happen. Residents started calling our house to express their outrage and support. Mr. Chin brought us homemade soup and a petition signed by 30 residents demanding Emma's reinstatement. "Your daughter helped me when no one else would," he said with tears in his eyes. "She spent 2 hours on the phone with the irrigation company to fix my sprinkler system. She never once made me feel like a burden." Mrs. Patterson organized a letter-writing campaign to the HOA board. "Emma was the only person in that office who treated me like a human being when I was struggling with postpartum depression," she wrote. "She would ask about my twins by name and always had encouraging words when I felt overwhelmed." The support was overwhelming and heartwarming, but it also highlighted the depth of Margaret's cruelty. Emma hadn't just been fired, a beloved community member had been attacked for being different. Our attorney, David Martinez, was a disability rights advocate who had handled dozens of similar cases. He reviewed our documentation with growing anger and determination. "This is one of the clearest cases of disability discrimination I've seen," he told us during our first official meeting. Margaret Whitfield created a hostile work environment specifically targeting Emma's disability. The bathroom timing, the desk relocation, the public humiliation. It's textbook discrimination. The legal process was slow and emotionally draining. Emma had to relive every humiliating moment, describing in detail how Margaret's behavior had affected her mental health and self-esteem. There were days when she wanted to quit, to simply walk away and try to rebuild her life without fighting. "Why put yourself through this?" she asked me one evening after a particularly difficult deposition. "Maybe it would be easier to just move on." "Because you deserve justice," I replied. "And because other people with disabilities deserve to work without fear of being treated like you were treated." Meanwhile, Margaret was fighting back with expensive lawyers and a public relations campaign designed to paint Emma as a disgruntled employee seeking a payout. She gave interviews to local media, claiming that Emma had been terminated for legitimate performance issues, not discrimination. "We have to maintain professional standards," Margaret told a reporter. "Just because someone has a disability doesn't mean they're exempt from meeting job requirements." But her carefully crafted narrative began to crumble when more witnesses came forward. Office cleaning staff testified about hearing Margaret's cruel comments. Residents provided detailed accounts of Emma's exceptional service. Mrs. Rodriguez risked her own job by testifying about Margaret's discriminatory behavior. What started as a legal case became a community movement. The Pine Valley residents who had experienced Emma's kindness and professionalism weren't going to stand by quietly while she was attacked. A local news station picked up the story after Mrs. Patterson contacted them. The reporter, Sarah Kim, was a disability advocate herself and recognized the broader implications of Emma's case. "This isn't just about one young woman losing her job," Sarah reported during the evening news. "This is about whether people with disabilities have the right to work with dignity and respect." The story went viral on social media. #JusticeForEmma began trending locally, with hundreds of people sharing their own experiences with workplace discrimination. Emma's story had touched a nerve in the disability community and beyond. Emma was hesitant about the media attention at first. She had always been private about her challenges, preferring to prove herself through actions rather than words. But as she read the supportive messages flooding in from strangers, she began to see her case as bigger than just her own experience. "Maybe this is my purpose," she told me one evening as we read through comments on a news article. "Maybe I went through all of this so I could speak up for other people who are facing the same discrimination." A GoFundMe campaign started by Mrs. Patterson raised enough money to cover Emma's living expenses during the legal battle. Local businesses began reaching out with job offers, impressed by Emma's grace under pressure and the community support she had generated. Margaret, meanwhile, was facing increasing pressure from Pine Valley residents. A recall petition was circulated to remove her as HOA president. Several board members who had initially supported her began distancing themselves as public opinion turned against her discriminatory actions. The breakthrough in our case came from an unexpected source. Janet, the office receptionist who had worked quietly in the background during Emma's employment, came forward with explosive evidence. She had been recording office interactions on her phone, initially to protect herself from Margaret's increasingly erratic behavior. What she captured was damning evidence of Margaret's discriminatory intent. In one recording, Margaret could be heard telling another board member, "I don't care if she does good work. Having a cripple in the front office sends the wrong message about our community." In another, she discussed her strategy for documenting Emma's termination. "I need to build a paper trail that makes it look like performance issues. I can't just say I don't want disabled people working here, even though that's the truth." When David played these recordings during a deposition, Margaret's expensive lawyers suddenly became much more interested in settling the case. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Margaret wasn't finished. In a last desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, she held a press conference claiming the recordings were taken out of context and edited to make her look bad. "I have nothing against people with disabilities," she insisted to the assembled reporters. "I simply expect all employees to meet the same standards." Sarah Kim was in the audience and immediately asked the question that exposed Margaret's true nature. "If you don't discriminate against people with disabilities, why did you time Emma's bathroom breaks when you didn't time anyone else's?" Margaret's face flushed red. That's different." She was taking advantage. "Taking advantage of what, exactly?" Sarah pressed. "Of her situation," Margaret stammered. "You mean her disability?" The press conference ended abruptly, but the damage was done. Margaret's own words had confirmed what everyone already knew. She had targeted Emma specifically because of her disability. The legal settlement came 6 months after Emma's termination. While the specific terms were confidential, it was substantial enough to ensure Emma's financial security and send a clear message about the cost of disability discrimination. More importantly, the settlement included non-monetary terms that would benefit future employees. The Pine Valley HOA was required to implement comprehensive disability awareness training for all board members and staff. They had to revise their employment policies to ensure ADA compliance and establish an independent committee to handle discrimination complaints. Margaret Whitfield was removed as HOA president by a landslide recall vote. The residents of Pine Valley had spoken clearly. They wanted leadership that reflected their values of inclusion and respect, not the bitter prejudice Margaret had brought to the position. Emma was offered her job back, but she had decided to move forward with new opportunities. Several local businesses had offered her positions, recognizing that her experience with discrimination had only strengthened her resolve and highlighted her exceptional character. She accepted a job with the city's community development department, working on accessibility initiatives and helping other people with disabilities navigate city services. It was perfect, meaningful work that used her talents while allowing her to advocate for others facing similar challenges. "This is what I was meant to do," Emma told me on her first day at the new job. "Margaret thought she was ending my career, but she actually helped me find my true calling." Emma's case had impacts far beyond Pine Valley. Her story was featured in disability rights publications and used as a case study in employment law courses. She began speaking at conferences and workshops, sharing her experience and educating employers about the value of inclusive workplaces. The Pine Valley community had been transformed by the experience as well. Residents who had never thought much about accessibility began advocating for improvements throughout the neighborhood. The local elementary school invited Emma to speak about disability awareness, and several families with disabled children moved to Pine Valley specifically because of the community's newfound commitment to inclusion. Mrs. Rodriguez was promoted to HOA general manager and implemented policies that made Pine Valley a model for inclusive community governance. She often credited Emma with inspiring positive changes that benefited everyone. "Emma didn't just fight for herself," Mrs. Rodriguez said during a community meeting. "She fought for the principle that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Our community is stronger because of her courage." Even some of Margaret's former supporters publicly apologized for their initial backing of her discriminatory actions. The experience had opened their eyes to the reality of disability discrimination and the importance of standing up for vulnerable community members. Margaret Whitfield's fall from grace was swift and complete. The publicity from Emma's case revealed other instances of her discriminatory behavior, including harassment of elderly residents and attempts to impose restrictive rules targeting families with children. Several other former HOA employees came forward with their own stories of Margaret's abusive management style. The picture that emerged was of a person who used her position of power to bully and demean anyone she perceived as different or vulnerable. Margaret's husband, apparently embarrassed by the negative attention, filed for divorce. Her social circle, comprised mainly of other status-conscious neighbors, gradually distanced themselves as her reputation became toxic. She was forced to sell her Pine Valley home and move to another state, where she hoped to escape the consequences of her actions. But in the age of social media, her story followed her. When she attempted to run for a position on her new community's HOA board, residents had already researched her background and decisively rejected her candidacy. The complete collapse of Margaret's life might have seemed like poetic justice, but Emma took no pleasure in her former tormentor's downfall. "I don't wish bad things for her," Emma said when I mentioned Margaret's various misfortunes. "I just hope she learns from this experience and becomes a better person. Hate and prejudice hurt everyone, including the people who carry those feelings. You don't have to go if it brings up bad memories," I told Emma as she read the formal invitation. Emma smiled, the confident expression of someone who had found her place in the world. "Actually, I think it would be healing. Full circle, you know?" The evening of the dinner was perfect, crisp autumn air and golden sunset lighting. As we drove into Pine Valley, I was struck by the changes in the neighborhood. New accessibility features had been added throughout the community. Sidewalks had been widened, curb cuts improved, and several homes now displayed small pride flags or accessibility symbols, subtle signs of the community's commitment to inclusion. The community center was packed with familiar faces. Mr. Chin hurried over as soon as he saw Emma, his face beaming with pride. Mrs. Patterson introduced Emma to her twins, now kindergartners who had learned about Miss Emma as a hero who fought for fairness. Mrs. Rodriguez took the podium as the evening's program began. 3 years ago, our community faced a choice, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. We could stand by and watch injustice happen, or we could stand up for our values. Thanks to Emma's courage and your support, we chose justice. She went on to describe the positive changes that had resulted from Emma's case. Not just policy improvements, but a fundamental shift in community culture toward inclusion and mutual support. When Emma was invited to speak, she approached the podium with the poise of someone who had found her voice and learned to use it effectively. 3 years ago, I thought my world was ending, she began, her clear voice reaching every corner of the room. I had been told I was worthless, useless, a burden. For a moment, I almost believed it. She paused, looking out at the sea of supportive faces. But this community showed me something different. You showed me that my worth isn't determined by how fast I can file documents or how long I need in the bathroom. You showed me that true strength comes from standing together against injustice. Emma's speech continued for 20 minutes, weaving together themes of resilience, community support, and the ongoing fight for disability rights. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted for several minutes, with many audience members wiping away tears. As the evening wound down, people approached Emma to share their own stories: family members with disabilities who had been inspired by her example, employers who had changed their hiring practices after learning about her case, young people with disabilities who saw her as a role model. 5 years have passed since Margaret Whitfield fired my daughter from the Pine Valley HOA office. Today, Emma serves as the state's Deputy Director of Disability Rights, a position she earned through years of dedicated advocacy and exceptional leadership. The Pine Valley case has been cited in dozens of legal proceedings and policy discussions. Emma's story is taught in law schools, business programs, and disability studies courses across the country. More importantly, it has contributed to real change in how employers think about disability accommodation and workplace inclusion. Emma married Marcus in a beautiful ceremony held in the Pine Valley Community Center, with half the neighborhood in attendance. They live in a fully accessible home they designed together, and Emma recently announced she's pregnant with their first child, a baby who will grow up in a world slightly more inclusive than the one Emma faced. Margaret Whitfield never did learn from her experience. She continues to move from community to community, leaving trails of conflict and discrimination in her wake. But her power to hurt people has been greatly diminished, and her reputation ensures that informed communities reject her attempts to gain positions of authority. The Pine Valley HOA office now employs 3 people with disabilities and has become a training site for other communities seeking to improve their accessibility practices. Mrs. Rodriguez frequently tells visitors, "This all started because one young woman had the courage to fight back against discrimination. Her bravery changed everything." Emma's story reminds us that individual acts of courage can create ripples that extend far beyond their original context. When faced with injustice, we have a choice. We can remain silent and hope someone else will act, or we can stand up and fight for what's right. My daughter chose to fight, and in doing so, she discovered that she was never useless, never worthless, never a burden. She was exactly what the world needed: a voice for justice, a champion for inclusion, and a reminder that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Sometimes the cruelest words spoken in anger reveal the speaker's character more than the target's worth. Margaret Whitfield called Emma useless, but Emma's usefulness has been proven in courtrooms, community centers, and corporate boardrooms across the country. The girl who was told she couldn't do a real job has spent the last 5 years changing how we define valuable work, productive employment, and meaningful contribution to society. Her impact continues to grow, touching lives and changing policies in ways that Margaret's narrow mind could never comprehend. Emma's story is ultimately about more than disability discrimination or workplace rights. It's about the fundamental human dignity that every person deserves, regardless of their abilities, appearance, or circumstances. It's about the power of community to stand against injustice and the strength that comes from refusing to accept others' limited vision of what we can achieve. In a world that too often sees disability as limitation, Emma chose to see it as a different way of experiencing and contributing to life. Her perspective, shaped by both challenges and triumphs, has enriched every community she's touched and every person she's helped. The Pine Valley HOA office still has a framed photo of Emma on the wall, not as a memorial to what was lost, but as a celebration of what was gained when one person refused to accept discrimination as acceptable. Under the photo is a simple plaque that reads, "Emma Martinez, who taught us that everyone has value." That's the legacy of a young woman who was told she was useless but proved she was irreplaceable. Her story continues to inspire others to fight for their worth, stand up against discrimination, and never accept anyone else's judgment of their value. In the end, Margaret Whitfield was wrong about everything. Emma wasn't useless, she was exactly what the world needed. And her usefulness continues to multiply, one changed life, one reformed policy, and one more inclusive community at a time.